It started like any other day. A quiet morning, a bustling shopping mall, families enjoying a weekend outing completely unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The security cameras were rolling, capturing the ordinary movements of shoppers drifting from store to store. But then, at exactly 3:17 p.m. something happened. A lone figure stepped into the main atrium, dressed in dark clothing, moving with a chilling sense of purpose. Within seconds, the air was shattered by the first gunshot. People screamed, chaos erupted, and what followed would become one of the most haunting incidents ever caught on camera. The footage, raw, terrifying, and all too real, would go viral within hours, spreading like wildfire across news stations and social media. It wasn't just another tragic event. It was a moment that would force an entire nation to confront its worst fears. But who was he? Where did he come from? And more importantly, why did he do it? As authorities scrambled to piece together the shooter's identity, the truth would reveal something far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. This was no random act of violence. The attacker wasn't just a faceless figure hidden behind a mask. He had a past, a story, and a reason that no one saw coming. In the aftermath, survivors would recount the horror they lived through. Law enforcement would be pushed to their limits, and a single question would loom over the investigation: could this have been stopped? As the footage made its way to every television screen in the country, one detail stood out, something hidden in plain sight, something that would make investigators question everything they thought they knew. And once they saw it, there was no turning back. In the days leading up to the attack, the shooter's life seemed unremarkable, at least on the surface. Neighbors described him as quiet but polite, the kind of person who never drew much attention. He lived alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of town, worked a job that didn't require much social interaction, and rarely engaged with others unless absolutely necessary. But there were signs, subtle cracks in the carefully maintained illusion of normalcy. A few co-workers recalled moments when he seemed distant, lost in thought, as if carrying a weight no one else could see. His online presence, though minimal, painted a more unsettling picture: cryptic messages buried within obscure forums, a fascination with violence that, in hindsight, seemed like a warning no one had noticed. Investigators combed through every aspect of his life, searching for anything that could explain what had driven him to that moment inside the mall. They found an eviction notice on his kitchen counter, unopened and weeks old. A stack of overdue bills piled near the door, untouched. But financial troubles alone weren't enough to explain what he had done. Then came the interview's friends, former classmates, anyone who had crossed paths with him in recent years. Some claimed they barely knew him, while others hesitated before speaking, as if holding something back. One former roommate, who hadn't spoken to him in years, described a sudden shift in his behavior during their last few months living together. He had started avoiding social situations altogether, spending hours alone in his room, whispering angrily to himself when he thought no one could hear. Another person recalled seeing him in a parking lot late one night, standing completely still, staring at nothing, gripping the steering wheel of his car so tightly his knuckles turned white. But then, something strange happened. A co-worker came forward with a story that didn't fit the narrative police were piecing together. She swore she had seen him just a week before the shooting, but not alone. He was in a diner on the edge of town, sitting across from a man she had never seen before, someone who seemed far more confident, far more in control. Their conversation was tense, whispered but urgent, with the shooter nodding along as if being given instructions. The man never touched his food, only sipped his coffee, keeping his eyes locked on the shooter the entire time. When the co-worker tried to recall what they were saying, only one phrase stuck in her mind, something the mysterious man had said right before he stood up to leave. "You know what needs to be done." Suddenly, the case wasn't so simple. Maybe this wasn't just about one man acting alone. Maybe he had help. Or worse, maybe he wasn't the one pulling the strings at all. Just as investigators began piecing together the shooter's final days, something unexpected happened. A crucial piece of evidence, the diner's security footage, vanished. The owner, an elderly man who had cooperated fully with law enforcement, swore that he had reviewed the footage himself the night before, watching the shooter and his mysterious companion exchange words in that dimly lit booth. But by the next morning, when detectives arrived to retrieve it, the hard drive was gone. No forced entry, no sign of a break, in just an empty space where the footage should have been. It was as if someone had known exactly what they were looking for and had taken it before anyone else could. The disappearance raised an unsettling question. Was this an isolated attack, or was there something larger at play? The deeper investigators dug, the stranger the case became. One of the lead detectives, a seasoned officer who had worked homicide for nearly 2 decades, received an anonymous message slipped under his windshield wiper late one evening. No return address, no signature, just a single piece of paper with a short, chilling warning: "Stop looking." At first, he dismissed it as a sick prank, the kind of thing that happens when a case gains national attention. But the very next day, one of the key witnesses, a woman who claimed to have seen the shooter arguing with someone outside his apartment, called to retract her statement. Her voice shook as she spoke, offering no explanation, only insisting that she had been mistaken and didn't want to be involved anymore. When asked if someone had threatened her, she hesitated for just a second too long before hanging up. Then, there was the matter of the shooter's past. While most of his life seemed painfully ordinary, a single event from years earlier stood out, a moment that had been buried, forgotten by almost everyone but those directly involved. It happened in a small town 3 states away, a late-night police raid on an illegal weapons operation. No one had connected it to the case at first, not until an old incident report surfaced with an unexpected name buried in the paperwork. The shooter had been there that night, not as a suspect, not even as a witness, but as someone barely mentioned at all. A name on a list, dismissed as unimportant. But now that moment in time seemed anything but irrelevant. Meanwhile, a new player entered the story, someone who claimed to have information that would change everything. A man who had been watching from the sidelines, waiting for the right moment to come forward. He didn't trust law enforcement, didn't trust the media, but he was willing to talk to the right person in the right place. And so, under the cover of darkness, in a parking garage far from prying eyes, an off-the-record meeting was set. But just as the detective arrived, headlights cut through the shadows, tires screeched against the pavement, and the source, this supposed key to unlocking the truth, vanished before he could say a word. All that remained was a single torn scrap of paper on the ground, one that looked like it had been ripped in a hurry. On it, scrawled in rushed, uneven handwriting, were 3 words: "Not what you think." The detective stood there for a long moment, gripping the torn scrap of paper as the echoes of the screeching tires faded into the night. The message, "Not what you think," rattled in his mind, looping like a warning he couldn't quite decipher. But before he could process what it meant, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A call from someone unexpected: Julia Carter, a local journalist who had been covering the case from the very beginning. She wasn't the kind of reporter who chased sensational headlines. She dug deep, asked the right questions, and didn't scare easily. But tonight, her voice wavered, a rare crack in her usual confidence. She had received something, an unmarked envelope slipped under her apartment door. Inside was a single photograph, grainy and distorted, but the image was unmistakable. The shooter, sitting at the diner, his face partially obscured by shadow. And across from him, the mysterious man from the missing security footage. The moment should have been a breakthrough, proof that the shooter wasn't acting alone. But there was something off about the picture, something that didn't fit. The timestamp in the corner read 11:42 p.m., nearly 5 hours after the attack had taken place. It didn't make sense. By that time, The shooter had already been declared dead, taken down by law enforcement inside the mall. And yet, there he was, alive and seemingly deep in conversation, long after he should have been lying lifeless on the cold tile floor. Julia didn't know what to make of it, and neither did the detective. Was the timestamp wrong? A forgery? Or worse, had they been looking at the wrong person the entire time? As they spoke in hushed voices over the phone, trying to make sense of the impossible, Julia suddenly went silent. The detective heard the faint sound of shuffling, a rustling noise in the background, and then her whisper, barely above her breath, "Someone's outside." She didn't hang up. Instead, he heard her footsteps moving quickly across the floor, the creak of a window opening, and then nothing. Dead silence. He called her name once, twice, no answer. A few seconds later, the line disconnected. At the same time, across town, another piece of the puzzle was falling into place, but in the worst possible way. The co-worker who had seen the shooter at the diner, the one who had first mentioned the strange man sitting across from him, was found unconscious in her apartment, her front door left ajar. No signs of a struggle, no forced entry. But her laptop, which she had used to send her statement to the police, was missing. Whatever she had seen, whoever she had described someone, had decided it was worth erasing. And just like that, what had seemed like a single tragic act of violence had spiraled into something far more complex, far more dangerous. The shooter wasn't just another troubled man with a gun. He was a piece of a larger game, a game where the rules kept shifting and the players remained hidden in the dark. And now, those who were getting too close were starting to disappear. The detective didn't go home that night. He couldn't. Something in his gut told him that whatever was happening, he was no longer just an investigator, he was a target. He sat in his car, parked in an empty lot just outside town, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. His mind replayed the last few hours on a loop. Julia's panicked whisper before the call cut out, the co-worker found unconscious, the missing evidence, the eerie photograph with an impossible timestamp. It didn't add up. None of it did. But one thing was becoming clear. Someone was watching, waiting, and erasing every piece of the truth before it could be uncovered. And now, they were coming for him too. His exhaustion was bone deep, but sleep wasn't an option. Instead, he reached for his phone and tried calling Julia again. Straight to voicemail. He tried her work number. No answer. A sinking feeling took hold of his chest, something worse than fear, a gnawing certainty that she was gone. He had to do something, had to find her, but just as he reached for the ignition, movement in his rearview mirror made him freeze. A car sat parked across the lot, headlights off, engine silent. It hadn't been there when he arrived. It hadn't made a sound. And yet, there it was, like it had been waiting for him to notice. His pulse quickened, adrenaline flooding his system as he tried to think. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just another driver taking a break, a coincidence. But deep down, he knew better. The feeling in his gut, the same one that had been gnawing at him since this case started, was screaming now. He glanced at his phone again, his fingers hovering over the emergency dial, but before he could press anything, the car's engine roared to life. The headlights flashed on, flooding his windshield with blinding white light. He shielded his eyes, barely catching the silhouette of a figure in the driver's seat. And then tires screeched. The car lurched forward, speeding straight toward him. Instinct took over. He slammed the gear shift into reverse, tires spinning wildly as he backed up just in time to avoid the impact. The other car skidded, just missing his front bumper, then tore out of the lot at breakneck speed. Without thinking, he floored it, chasing after them. His heart pounded against his ribs as he swerved onto the empty highway, tailing the mystery vehicle as it weaved recklessly through the dark. Whoever was behind the wheel knew the roads well, taking sharp turns at impossible speeds, but the detective didn't let up. He pushed his car harder, gripping the wheel with shaking hands, refusing to let them slip away. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The other car took one final turn, a road leading into an industrial zone, and by the time he followed, it was gone. No taillights, no screeching tires, just an empty stretch of road lined with abandoned buildings. He slowed to a crawl, scanning every alley, every hidden corner. Nothing. It was like the car had vanished into thin air. He exhaled sharply, trying to steady his breathing, but the rush of adrenaline had left a sharp ache in his chest. Whoever they were, they had sent a message loud and clear. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a hunt. And if he didn't figure out the truth fast, he had no doubt that next time they wouldn't miss. The detective sat in his car, gripping the wheel as his pulse finally began to slow. He was still alive, but for how much longer? The night's events had sent a clear message. He wasn't just an investigator on the case anymore. He was in the middle of something much bigger, something that had been set in motion long before he ever started digging. He needed answers. Fast. And there was only one place left to turn. With nowhere else to go, he drove straight to Julia's apartment. The building was dark, eerily quiet. He knew she wasn't inside, but maybe there was something she left behind, something that could explain why she had become a target. He picked the lock quickly, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. The apartment looked untouched, no signs of a struggle, but a strange sensation settled over him, like he wasn't alone. He reached for his gun instinctively, scanning the room. Then his eyes caught something, a blinking light on her laptop. It was open on her desk, the screen dimmed but not locked. Someone had been using it. Recently. He took a cautious step forward, nudging the mousepad. The screen flickered back to life, revealing an open email draft. His breath hitched as he read the first few words. If anything happens to me, the truth is in the files. But it's not what we thought. His pulse pounded as he scrolled further, but the email was unfinished. No recipient. No attachment. Just a half-written warning that came too late. His stomach twisted as he searched the desktop, checking for any hidden folders, anything that might explain what Julia had discovered. And then he saw it, an audio file, time-stamped from earlier that night, just before she disappeared. His hands shook as he pressed play. At first, there was silence. Then, Julia's voice came through, hurried, breathless. It doesn't make sense. The footage is fake. It's not him. The recording cut off abruptly. Silence again. Then, something else. A sound he almost missed. A faint knock. 3 taps. A pause. Then a voice, low, calm, terrifying in its certainty. Miss Carter, we need to talk. The file ended. A chill ran down his spine. His instincts had been right all along. The truth was buried deeper than anyone realized. The shooter at the mall, the attack caught on camera, the man in the diner, it wasn't what it seemed. The footage was fake. But that meant what? That the shooter wasn't the real threat. That someone had set him up. And if so, who was really pulling the strings? Then, before he could even process what he had just heard, the room was flooded with blue and red lights. Sirens wailed outside. Tires screeched to a stop. And then heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. They were coming for him. The pounding on the door was relentless, each strike against the wood, like a gunshot in the detective's ears. His body moved on instinct, shoving the laptop into his bag as he scanned the apartment for an exit. The fire escape. It was his only way out. But before he could take a step, a deep voice rang out from the hallway. "Detective, open the door." Now. The voice was familiar, and that was what made it worse. It belonged to Captain Harris, his superior, the man who had put him on this case in the first place. He froze, gripping the strap of his bag, his mind racing. Harris wasn't just his boss, he was someone he had trusted, someone he had worked with for years. But that trust was breaking, crumbling under the weight of everything that had happened. The police showing up now, at this exact moment, wasn't a coincidence. Someone had tipped them off. Someone had known exactly where he would be. He had two choices: stay, open the door, and hope that whatever waited for him on the other side wasn't a setup, or run, disappear into the night, and become a fugitive in his own city. A deep breath. His decision was made before he even realized it. He wasn't going to be taken, not until he had the truth. Moving fast, he unlatched the window and climbed onto the fire escape, just as the front door burst open behind him. He's running. Shouts. Footsteps. A bullet shattered the window above his head, sending glass raining down onto his back as he scrambled down the metal stairs. His heart pounded as he hit the alleyway, sprinting into the darkness, knowing that once he did this, there was no turning back. He wasn't just an investigator anymore. He was the hunted. By the time he reached the train yard on the outskirts of the city, he was out of breath, his mind buzzing with everything that had happened. He had lost them for now, but the real problem remained. Who could he trust? Who had turned against him? And most importantly, why? He pulled out his phone, hesitating before dialing a number he never thought he'd need to call. It rang once, twice, and then, "You shouldn't have contacted me." The voice on the other end was cold, emotionless. But he knew it well. Lane Parker. Ex-FBI disgraced. Forced out under circumstances no one ever fully explained. He had worked with her once, years ago, and if there was anyone who could help him, it was her. But as he listened to the silence on the other end, he realized something. She wasn't surprised to hear from him. "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low, steady. A pause. Then finally, her answer. "Meet me in an hour. And, detective, bring everything you have. Because after tonight, you're either going to find the truth or you're never going to be seen again." The line went dead. For the first time since this all began, the detective felt something settle deep in his gut, something worse than fear. The truth wasn't just dangerous. It was a death sentence. And now, it was too late to walk away. The detective didn't stop moving. He couldn't. Every second wasted brought him closer to being found, to being silenced like Julia, like the coworker who saw too much, like all the others who had brushed against the truth and disappeared. His car was useless, too easy to track. So he stayed in the shadows, cutting through alleyways and abandoned streets, his mind racing toward one inevitable conclusion. He wasn't just up against a lone corrupt cop or a cover-up gone wrong. This was bigger. Much bigger. By the time he reached the meeting spot, an old, half-demolished train station on the outskirts of the city, he was already running through the possibilities. Lane Parker had once been one of the best, before she was forced out. He never knew the full story, but now, standing in the darkness, waiting for her to show, he had a sick feeling that whatever got her kicked out of the FBI was connected to what was happening now. And if that was true, then this conspiracy wasn't just about a staged mass shooting. It was about something far worse. The soft crunch of boots on gravel snapped him out of his thoughts. He turned sharply, heart pounding, but it was her. Lane stepped out of the shadows, her dark coat pulled tight against the wind, her eyes sharp, scanning him like she was measuring how much trouble he was already in. "You look like hell," she muttered, but there was no humor in her voice. "You knew," he shot back. "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled a flash drive from her pocket and held it up between two fingers. "It's bigger than you think," she said, her voice tight. "And you were never supposed to get this far." His stomach twisted. "What is it?" Lane exhaled sharply. "Proof. Or, at least, enough of it to get you killed. You were right about the shooter. He was never supposed to survive the attack. He wasn't even supposed to be the one pulling the trigger." The real threat, the real mastermind, has been rewriting the entire narrative from the beginning. His mind reeled. The security footage. The impossible photograph. Julia's last words, "The footage is fake." He had suspected something was off, but this was something else entirely. "Who?" he demanded. "Who's behind this?" Lane hesitated, and that was the first red flag. "Lane," he warned. Then, before she could answer, a gun cocked behind him. Cold steel pressed against the back of his skull. "Drop the bag, detective." His entire body went rigid. The voice was one he knew too well. A voice that had backed him up on cases, shared drinks with him after long shifts, stood beside him at crime scenes. Captain Harris. His chest tightened. He turned slowly, hands raised, meeting the eyes of the man he had trusted for years. There was no hesitation in Harris's expression, no flicker of doubt. Just cold calculation. "I really hoped you'd let this one go," Harris said, shaking his head. "But you never could stop digging, could you?" Lane stepped back, her gaze unreadable. "You knew?" the detective whispered, realization crashing over him. "You knew he was coming." A flicker of something in her eyes, guilt maybe. But she didn't deny it. Harris sighed. "I liked you. You were a damn good detective. But you don't understand the game you're playing. You think this is about a mass shooting? That was just a tool, a distraction, a way to push through something much bigger." The detective's mind spun. He had been chasing a ghost, thinking the shooter was the key to everything. But Harris was right. The shooting was never the real crime. It was the smokescreen. And if Harris was involved, then so were others. People with power. People who could rewrite the truth itself. His jaw clenched. "How many?" he demanded. "How far does this go?" Harris smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Far enough that no one's coming to save you." The detective's pulse pounded. He had fought his way this far. He wasn't about to go down now. Together, they ate. The detective sat in the dimly lit motel room, staring at the laptop screen as the video played for the third time. The footage he had risked everything to obtain, the undeniable proof that would shatter the public narrative, was right in front of him. It showed Royce, not in some back room, not hiding in the shadows, but at the center of it all. Conversations recorded, documents signed, orders given. The massacre had been orchestrated, engineered down to the finest detail. A calculated horror designed to shift power in ways the public would never suspect. His hands clenched into fists as he leaned back in the creaking chair. The weight of the truth was suffocating. He had spent his entire career believing that exposing the facts was enough, that justice would follow naturally if the right people saw what was hidden. But now, sitting there, exhausted and bruised, he wasn't so sure. Royce wasn't some rogue player. He was part of a system, a machine too vast and too well-oiled to be taken down with a single revelation. And Harris had been right. There was always someone bigger, someone pulling the strings beyond the ones they could see. Lane paced near the window, her arm hastily bandaged, eyes scanning the parking lot outside, as if expecting trouble to roll in at any moment. She had been silent for the past hour, processing the same truth he was. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. "If we put this out there, they'll bury it before it even catches fire. You know that, right?" He exhaled sharply. He did know. If he sent the files to the wrong journalist, the wrong outlet, it would disappear into bureaucratic oblivion. If he handed it over to law enforcement, it would never see the light of day. Even the public, if they even saw the truth, had been conditioned to doubt, to second guess, to believe the version of reality that was safest. Would they believe him? Or would the machine simply twist the story again, spin it until he was the villain, until Royce was the hero, until all of this was reduced to just another conspiracy theory buried under the next news cycle? Lane stopped pacing and met his eyes. "We can still walk away. We can disappear." He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You really think they'd let us?" She didn't answer because they both knew the truth. There was no walking away. Not for them. Not after what they had seen, what they had uncovered. They had already crossed the line, and now there were only two options: expose the truth and face the consequences, or disappear and let the cycle continue. The detective reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. The contact was already pulled up, an independent journalist he had worked with before, one of the few left who still knew what real reporting meant. But even then, there were no guarantees. One file, one message, one final shot at the truth. His thumb hovered over the send button. Then, a noise outside. A car pulling in. Lane tensed. Her hand went to her gun. The detective's pulse hammered, but he didn't move. He just stared at the screen, knowing that once he pressed send, there would be no undoing it. No safety net. No second chances. The headlights of the car flicked off. The engine stopped. Silence stretched thick in the air. He took a breath, pressed send, and then everything went dark. "Got what you need?" she asked, breathless. "I don't know," he admitted, "but it's a start." Together, The detective sat in the dimly lit motel room, staring at the laptop screen as the video played for the third time. The footage he had risked everything to obtain, the undeniable proof that would shatter the public narrative, was right in front of him. It showed Royce not in some back room, not hiding in the shadows, but at the center of it all. Conversations recorded, documents signed, orders given. The massacre had been orchestrated, engineered down to the finest detail. A calculated horror designed to shift power in ways the public would never suspect. His hands clenched into fists as he leaned back in the creaking chair. The weight of the truth was suffocating. He had spent his entire career believing that exposing the facts was enough, that justice would follow naturally if the right people saw what was hidden. But now, sitting there, exhausted and bruised, he wasn't so sure. Royce wasn't some rogue player. He was part of a system, a machine too vast and too well-oiled to be taken down with a single revelation. And Harris had been right. There was always someone bigger, someone pulling the strings beyond the ones they could see. Lane paced near the window, her arm hastily bandaged, eyes scanning the parking lot outside, as if expecting trouble to roll in at any moment. She had been silent for the past hour, processing the same truth he was. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. "If we put this out there, they'll bury it before it even catches fire. You know that, right?" He exhaled sharply. He did know. If he sent the files to the wrong journalist, the wrong outlet, it would disappear into bureaucratic oblivion. If he handed it over to law enforcement, it would never see the light of day. Even the public, if they even saw the truth, had been conditioned to doubt, to second-guess, to believe the version of reality that was safest. Would they believe him? Or would the machine simply twist the story again, spin it until he was the villain, until Royce was the hero, until all of this was reduced to just another conspiracy theory buried under the next news cycle? Lane stopped pacing and met his eyes. "We can still walk away. We can disappear." He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You really think they'd let us?" She didn't answer because they both knew the truth. There was no walking away. Not for them. Not after what they had seen, what they had uncovered. They had already crossed the line, and now there were only two options: expose the truth and face the consequences, or disappear and let the cycle continue. The detective reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. The contact was already pulled up, an independent journalist he had worked with before, one of the few left who still knew what real reporting meant. But even then, there were no guarantees. One file, one message, one final shot at the truth. His thumb hovered over the send button. Then, a noise outside. A car pulling in. Lane tensed. Her hand went to her gun. The detective's pulse hammered, but he didn't move. He just stared at the screen, knowing that once he pressed send, there would be no undoing it. No safety net. No second chances. The headlights of the car flicked off. The engine stopped. Silence stretched thick in the air. He took a breath, pressed send, and then everything went dark.